Okay. Good evening. Hi. I think it would be prudent to start. Welcome. Hi, my name is Shimon Basai. I'm an intermediate unit master here. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'm very pleased to present Bjarke Ingels. How's that for pronunciation? It's very good. I was practicing in front of a mirror before I came. Bjarke with his partner Julien De Smedt, pronunciation? Okay, good. Are the Copenhagen-based practice plot. To give you an idea how precociously young they are in a profession that once considered older age to be a natural asset. The combined age of Bjarke and Julien is still only 61% of Philip Johnson's age when he died earlier this year. And at the rate they're building, I believe plot will easily overtake Johnson well before either of them reach a midlife crisis. Within only 4 years of being together, they've managed to win a remarkable number of competitions, built several critically and popularly received projects, and were recipients of the Prix de Lyon at last year's Venice Architecture Biennale. They beat a whole host of very much more established super names, and I think it was a real triumph for youth, spelled Y-O-O-F. It's no wonder that they seem to feature on every architecture department poster that graces our notice boards here at the AA. And I've certainly been just keeping an eye out on this over the last year and a half, and almost without fail, Bjarke or Julien and plot are pretty much up on the poster top 10. Before Bjarke set up plot with Julien, he was working for OMA. And plot's success seems to confirm that OMA is to young architecture what Afghanistan was to the Taliban, a premier breeding ground for people who want to change the world. What strikes me about plot is not so much in the language of their finished proposals, which are friendly, smart, and elegant versions of function determining form, but the air of angst-free abandon that their practice promotes. Starchitects have famously employed magician tricks to appear more mysterious and otherworldly than the rest of us mere mortals. Architecture magazines are full of architects' poses, pontifications, and impenetrable ponderings on very important things. Ingels and Smedt strike no such melancholic pose. In fact, they smile a lot, and I think we have to take the fact that they smile a lot very seriously. Like good comedy, plot's work looks effortless, but it's the result of careful crafting, precise means of expression, and a canny knack for perfect timing, wrapped up in easy-to-digest bites. Please welcome Bjarke Ingels.
Best places on the most noisy and the most dusty activities. Why are we pushed to the periphery when all we want is to live together in the centers? Does 5 million people need more than one harbor? And could one port be the gate to 300 million people? Could Denmark create a Baltic Superharbour worthy of the largest fleet in the world? There are two maps of Denmark, a green one and a blue one. Blue Denmark is twice the size of green Denmark. The Danish coastline is 7,000 kilometers long, which means that if we stretch it out, it'll reach all the way to Pakistan or South Africa. The Danish coastline has the same length as the coastlines of Italy or India. All major Danish cities are on the waterfront, and even though only 12% of the country is urbanized, 40% of our coastline is urbanized. This means that 2/3 of the country live by the sea.
If you ask a real estate agent what creates value, you won't say architecture. It will talk about location. Location is defined by proximity. Proximity to the water and proximity to the centers. Our harbors always occupy our most valuable plots of land.
So what kind of money are we making in these areas? If we look at the total revenue generated by Danish harbor activities, it's a mere fraction of, for instance, tourism. It would appear that we are spending our best places on our worst business, but it's a growing business. 98% of global goods traffic is by sea. In Denmark, 75% of the international goods traffic goes on a ship, but only 7% of the national traffic is shipping. Shipping is global, trucking is local. The amount of containers on the global oceans have grown exponentially since the first containers in the 50s. And the container ships are getting bigger and bigger and go deeper and deeper and deeper.
The European Union is expanding to the east. Those new European countries are currently experiencing the highest growth in Europe. The container traffic in the Baltic Sea doubles every 5 years, and the Baltic Sea has a hinterland of 300 million people.
Denmark has a reducing amount of international harbors, but most goods go on feeder ships to Rotterdam, and from here in large container ships to the rest of the world. What if we could skip Rotterdam and concentrate all our small-scale harbors into one strategically located superharbour that could become the main port to the Baltic Sea?
The big container ships need 20 meters of water depth. They can currently sail down the Danish coastline all the way to the Fehmarn Belt, where the water depth gets too low so they can't pass. This is the crossing point of the two main flows of goods in the region. The north-south axis from Scandinavia to Europe, and the east-west axis from the new Europe to the rest of the world. Here, Denmark and Germany are planning a new bridge. The most expensive solution is a pure bridge, or a pure tunnel, but a hybrid connection of bridge and tunnel will save €500 million and provide a new artificial island in the middle of the crossing of flows of international traffic.
Today this area experiences negative growth, separating the Coma region, Copenhagen-Malmö, from the growth zones in northern Germany. The new superharbour could become an industrial and logistic hotspot, connecting the two existing growth zones to the continuous growth belt of the blue banana, turning the blue banana into the green slingshot. The superharbour will gradually absorb all harbour-related industries, freeing up the waterfronts of all of Denmark's major cities for new urban life forms.
So what kind of free space are we talking about? Denmark's 12 biggest cities are all port cities. They constitute 360 square kilometers of urban substance and 36 million square meters of harbor space. The liberated waterfronts will double the size of the Danish city centers.
The freed waterfronts are worth 20 billion euros, 20 times the cost of the superharbour. If populated with the density of Tokyo, a third of the Danish population could move here, allowing all Danes to live by the sea. If stretched out, the new waterfronts constitute 120 kilometers of urban coastline, more than 25 times the length of Copacabana. how to organize a Superharbour. First you collect all the areas you need to reorganize, then you reshuffle them according to program and use, and instead of being forced to follow a linear coastline, we find ourselves with the freedom to organize our Superharbour with piers in all directions. Each pier will be devoted to its own particular program and use, and they'll all be connected to a central node of trains, trucks and industry. The new Superharbour will be 7 times the size of the APM terminal in Miami,
and will have the same capacity as Rotterdam.
And the new Superharbour will be the first Danish landmark
visible from outer space.
This project about the Superharbour was a project we did as part of an exhibition called 7 New Denmarks, which we did together with the Bruce Mouse Studio for the Danish pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2004. And the idea of the exhibition was to take a new look at the design and architecture, because Danish design was sort of something that was happening primarily in the 50s and 60s, sort of classic design classics, especially furniture, lamps, chairs, Arne Jacobsen furniture, made Danish design a sort of a brand. But then somehow the success of our ancestors has somehow cast so much shadow on the sort of coming generations that today, if you look at the Danish furniture factory, Fritz Hansen, 80% of their turnover comes from designs that are more than 30 years old. So we try to sort of liberate ourselves from this very sort of tight definition of design and architecture, and said, what if the architecture is about the big questions and not about sort of polishing the details of already established typologies, but by really sort of looking at all of Denmark within 7 different economies. And the project for the Superharbour was the idea of looking at Denmark within the economy of movement, of how containers move sort of all over the planet, and how we could reposition Denmark in this sort of global flow of goods. Sort of, we got so sort of excited about our star-shaped Superharbour that we started to believe that it was actually sort of the logo of our company. But in fact, it's the logo of this man. It's Mærsk Mc-Kinney Møller. He's the owner of Mærsk Sealand. He's the owner of 25% of all containers in the world. He has the largest commercial fleet on the planet. And we thought if we would somehow make the design recognizable to him, he's Danish, by the way. We thought maybe he would sort of tend to find an affection for it. So we submitted it to him, submitted the video, and so he could take the idea if he liked it. But he declined. So we had to leave it there. But sort of recently, we had a meeting in the office with a guy from Guangxi Institute of Research, Design and Architecture in China, and he sort of he really liked the project, because the Guangxi province is believed to be the next growth zone after Beijing and Shanghai, and it's positioned as the northeast entry point to Southeast Asia. So they're actually sort of quite fascinated by this idea of having an offshore Superharbour. So we did some alterations to fit their taste. Our other project for the Venice Biennale was a project we did for a concert hall in Stavanger in Norway. And it's like a 1 billion Norwegian kroner project, like 150 million pounds, like 100 million pounds. And it follows in this sort of boom of different regional capitals making sort of cultural landmark projects in order to position themselves in the interregional competition for attracting foreign investment and know-how, which was somehow spurred by I guess first by the Sydney Opera, but especially by the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, like almost becoming the Bilbao effect. That until the Frank Gehry design for the Guggenheim in Bilbao, nobody heard about this Basquian city in north of Spain. But now everybody knows where it is, just because of the power of the architecture. And somehow the concert hall as a typology has become one of the sort of preferred weapons in this arms race of competing between cities to becoming sort of attractive in a sort of, regional competition. So but when you invest massive amounts in a concert hall, you should just be aware that it's only a small fraction of the population that actually is going to use it for what it's intended for. Most people will never get to know it from the inside, they'll only see it from the outside. So we sort of put as a sort of mission statement with the design that our building should be as accessible and as accommodating and as exciting on the outside as on the inside. So the design is made of, there was two consultants that had defined these two, a shoebox and a sort of cuckoo box theater. So we couldn't really change the architecture of them, but somehow we placed them connected at the back of this sort of spine of the backstage area, and then we used the parking to bridge to the city, and finally put the lobby at the waterfront connecting the two concert halls. And then instead of sort of putting an object in the city, we made this sort of stepped landscape as a sort of artificial topography that would connect the city level down to the waterfront, move the landscape of the city all over the parking, and finally sort of create access to the top of one of the concert halls, creating this arena-like outdoor auditorium for up to 2,000 people. And sort of when you move down, so the entire sort of form has been created in order to provide as much connection and access. But when you move down, this sort of monolithic landscape actually turns out to be transparent. The steps are floating, and you can see inside what's happening inside the concert hall. And from inside the main foyer, you have views into the concert halls, and you can see the city life happening on the sort of outer skin of the building. Here between the concert hall and the sort of soft sort of stepped landscape of the outer skin, you get this sort of gorge condition where you can access the different balconies climbing up the auditorium. And finally, because the architecture is sort of always defined by sort of trying to perform different things, you know, make this sort of steady access. These gorges are cut in order to bring daylight to the backstage functions. These steps are open in order to ventilate the parking. So here and there, the building is manipulated, so depending on which side you see it from, it's going to change character and architecture. In the end, we got sort of slightly fascinated by the fact that people moving on the building almost look like little pieces of music. And what happened was that the jury in Stavanger sort of declined the project, but it was also on display publicly in the city, and the citizens of Stavanger could sort of vote for their favorite project, and they chose this one as their favorite. So when the jury in Venice also chose it as the best concert hall, there was this article by sort of a Norwegian art critic who wrote, sort of, it was on the cover of the Stavanger newspaper, saying that the people chose the architecture of the future. So we've been waiting for the city of the mayor of Stavanger to contact us ever since, but the phone hasn't been ringing. So the combination of sort of the project about the harbors and this sort of waterfront development has been quite characteristic for a lot of the production we've been doing in the office. The fact that the harborfront areas that previously had some industrial functions, the industrial functions are sort of consolidating and free up the former sort of industrial wastelands for new sort of culture and leisure functions. The first project we ever realized was this sort of harbor bath at the River Copenhagen, where the water has now become so clean that in the summer you can actually swim in the middle of the city. And so in the summer, this place can actually house 1,000 people swimming at the same time. And that's sort of the tower of the city hall you see in the background, so it's really sort of in the middle of the center. This was the neighbor building. It's a big bank that sort of said welcome to the bath when it opened. And quite soon it's the same building. We were invited to do a competition on the other side, the harbor bath this year. That's the bank. And this is the side of Copenhagen where the development has turned into this sort of repetition of big, fat, boring modern boxes that sort of block the connection from the city to the water. It's behind it is this very nice historical part of town. So this was the site, and that was actually the local master plan. It looked like this, which would sort of not really give like a lot of view towards the water, and it would create this sort of super dead outdoor space. Our big crisis was that all of the program of the project could actually be put just in these two super boring office labs. They would sort of give all the workstations a nice view of the sea, but somehow we found it really hard to criticize it, because it really sort of on a sort of client level it really did all it needed to do. But in the end we sort of tried to say that, you know, what this place needs is not so much sort of public space or urban space, but it's public life. So somehow by doing this we wouldn't really focus activity. It would be this sort of modernistic wasteland with just empty space in between. So in a sort of desperate attempt to escape the logic of these two boring towers just in the gap, we went on through this onslaught of, I think, 80 different attempts, just trying to find some kind of logic that would be able to wrest ourselves out of this quite boring scheme. So in the end we returned to the sort of local master plan and tried to sort of manipulate it by twisting and turning the buildings in this sort of Liebeskind-esque language. We could actually give all offices a direct view to the water, and the sort of the square would open up, also giving the square a direct view of the water. And finally, instead of having this sort of big open wasteland, we would make these sort of nice little niches where sort of public life and gardens could insert itself. And sort of rather than just imitating the big scale or the small scale, we made this sort of transition from the historical to the modern, giving this sort of almost artificial sort of alpine silhouette of buildings with sort of roof gardens facing the city and the big facade facing the water. And then finally, as an extra piece of program, at some point the office plans became too small to really function as an efficient office. So at the top we put these sort of private homes that would be sort of almost like little individual villas looking over the roof of the city. And then finally we elevated the square so that the big existing bank that has this sort of central void would actually become the sort of the view corridor for the life on the plaza. You see sort of these different sort of small scale experiences that happens because of this larger move. So the plans move from like large scale parking to shopping to offices, and then as the plans get smaller they convert to housing. So and you see the view from the waterfront. Unfortunately, the clients didn't really believe in the scheme, and there had just been this project in Copenhagen by Erik van Egeraat, where he did these 6 extremely high towers, and it was the same client, and the city of Copenhagen had voted against the clients of the towers of Egeraat. So as they cancelled that project, the client ended up giving this commission to him instead. But sort of we kept doing waterfront projects. We got invited by a client in Umeå in the sort of far north of Sweden, who had acquired this waterfront site that used to be industry, this sort of industrial hole separating the possibility of having a waterfront promenade. Also there's this very heavy traffic road shutting the side streets off from connecting to the water. And finally the skyline was dominated. It's this sort of historical Swedish city where the skyline is dominated by these 2 quite boring towers. So we decided, okay, we want to reinsert the waterfront promenade. We want to make sure that the sort of access and view from the city to the water is preserved and reinforced. And finally, we would sort of reclaim the skyline of Umeå, both giving all the hotel residents views up and down the river to the east and the west, but also sort of making a new landmark instead of these two 60 slabs. So how to do all three things at once? We sort of decided to sort of take the standard sort of icon of a hotel slab with east-west facing windows, and then sort of tear it open at the bottom so it would merge, creating a sort of a spa and a swimming pool touching the water, and a conference center and meeting room complex facing the city, and then opening up to allow contact for the promenade to pass through and for the side street to go down to the water. So it will look a little bit like this. So it's basically the street pavement sort of waving up, becoming the roof of the conference center here, allowing views, and also like almost like these holes in the ice. There would be these skylights looking, bringing daylight to the submerged functions, and then the sort of intensity of the skylights would increase, becoming windows for the hotel rooms. This is the view from the side street. And the building would sort of spread its legs open and create this sort of covered plaza that would still be able to get sun, but sort of would protect from the Scandinavian climate. So if you start at the top, there's this sort of rooftop bar, and then sort of a series of quite traditional hotel rooms. But then at some point the building starts sort of sliding apart, and just at the moment where the two towers kiss is the moment of the lobby. And then they sort of continue separating, becoming a meeting room complex and conference center on one side, and fitness and spa on the other side. So when we submitted the project, we were sort of quite excited about it. We thought it was really sort of quite a building, but maybe it really didn't look like something from the north of Sweden. It was probably more something for Shanghai or something like that. And the client also thought so. So we lost. But sort of recently, when we had the meeting with this guy from the Guangxi Institute, he saw the project and he said, "So, wow, that's the Chinese character for the word people." So this is this is actually how you write people in Chinese. There it is. It's I think it's pronounced Jin, and also it turns out that the subject for the Shanghai World Expo in 2010 is sort of a better city, better living, to project the Chinese pursuit, the Chinese people-oriented pursuit, is how it is. And it's actually on the waterfront, and there's this sort of access crossing the river. So we made sort of a, in Umeå it was 60 meters tall. Here we made a version that's 250 meters tall. But a beautiful retrofit. So one building goes into this building for body culture, the other for mind culture, conference and sports, and have this sort of super clear sort of word standing at the waterfront. So actually in 2 weeks we are part of an international design exhibition in Shanghai, where we're going to present this project, hoping to find a friendly client. So this was how it looked like in Umeå actually, and hopefully it could be the Eiffel Tower of the 2010 World Expo in Shanghai. It's actually not the first time we've been working with sort of literal ideas in architecture. In another city, we did a master plan for the waterfront, and the only piece of land, most of it belonged to the Haba, like a private company, but most of the only strip of land that the city actually owned was this tiny strip, like right in front of the water. The water is right here. And they've been discussing for 25 years whether or not to develop it, because if you would build like you normally do in the city of Vejle, you would build 4 floors, and in order to get the sufficient economy, you would have to sort of cover the entire waterfront and block the connection from the city out to the water. So we said, okay, we build twice as high and half as wide, but instead of having these sort of 5 anonymous modern monoliths, we decided to give them some sort of local character. So this is actually the name of the city, Vejle. And we, so you can say in a way we, normally I would think that this was like a lame idea, but in fact in Vejle it turns out that you can say the typographical qualities of Vejle are actually quite nice. The E has these sort of elevated roof gardens where sort of people can hang out, and sort of in fact it's quite simple, sort of slightly sculptural buildings that sort of seen close they're just like slightly expressive architecture. But the further you get away, the clearer it gets, and when you drive over the bridge, you're gonna have a pretty clear idea where you're going. There was actually so it actually made for the first time in 25 years, this project managed to gather the entire city hall to vote for selling the land, and we submitted a bid together with a big housing company and a big developer. And there was just municipal elections in Denmark yesterday, so soon it's going to be decided whether or not this is the future waterfront of Vejle. It's by far the one project ever that got the most instant response. It even made it to a double spread in tank. So I think we tried this idea now. Back in Copenhagen, recently there was a big foundation that made a call for better urban spaces, where they actually said to all of the cities of Denmark that people could come with ideas for making a better urban space, and then they would pay half the budget of realizing it if the city or whoever was interested in paying the other half if they liked it. So we're from Copenhagen. Our office is located here, and it was in the middle of the summer, and we sort of had become quite aware that when the sun is out, it's hard to find a cafe with sunlight for more than like 1 hour. So we thought it could be cool to put a new public space in the middle where there is hardly any. So we found this roof of an existing department store called Magasin, which is a 3,000 square meter big open vacant lot in the middle of this sort of open sea of Copenhagen. All of Copenhagen is 6 floors high. Only the historical towers stick up. And the idea was to pick a big public square on the roof of Magasin. But Magasin is actually not one building, but it's actually sort of 5 or 6 buildings that have grown together over the last 100 years. So the trick became how to join these different levels into one sort of continuous public space and all the way down to the city level. A bit like sort of vacuum forming a big public plaza on top of an existing roof. It turned out actually that the Magasin actually has this sort of double facade where they used to have access for the ventilation system. Now they have a new system. So we found out that we could actually slide in an escalator without even penetrating the building. That would give you to the shelf where you would get a new access for Magasin. You could continue up on this big square. Also, it turned out that the Magasin had just gotten a permission for doing 100 new parking spots in their parking. So we could actually extend the parking and get a drop-off at 30 meters. You can actually take a taxi all the way to the roof of Magasin. You could go in, drink a coffee in the cafe. At night, this sort of Danish staircase would have the different events happening. It would be sort of the place you hang out in the summer. And finally, for winter, this would be where you would drive up and get your Christmas tree. And there's this sports foundation that normally in the winter sponsors an ice hockey rink down on the ground. They could sponsor some snow cannons. We have this Kelking mountain at the top of the city. And we submitted this in 2003, and it got selected as one of 7 projects that the foundation would realize. But at the same time, the department store was getting into financial mayhem. So they've been for sale actually for quite a while, and finally they got sold to an Icelandic company that has now shown some interest in the project, but we can't really say when it's going to happen. So in the meanwhile, we were invited to do the competition for this it's a sort of social project, a maritime youth house on the waterfront in another place in Copenhagen, on this sort of island, which is the island where the airport is. It's also the island that used to be the sort of waste dump of Copenhagen. So even though it sort of has this beautiful location, the site is completely polluted. So a third of the budget was reserved for digging up all of the topsoil, driving it like a kilometer away to a polluted soil deposit, and pay an environmental tax of 3 million kroner, like a third of the budget. But we did some analysis of the contamination and found out that it was so-called heavy metals that don't vaporize, they don't interact with the surroundings. So actually by digging up the topsoil, all we were doing was like putting a lid on it. So we found out that we could actually, if we would cover the entire site with a wooden deck that would prevent people from getting to the polluted soil, it would be the same effect. So we could save the money on the tax and use it on the architecture instead. So when we were hammering down the piles, we could sort of hammer down the piles a little deeper and get some access to the water, lift it up higher to integrate the youth club buildings. And we showed the client just these very simple diagrams saying, you know, you can consider this your magic carpet. You can twist and turn it however you like to make it do whatever you want to do. And we'll just be your architects and do what you say and sort of build it for you. So they got this sort of inventory of possibilities that they could sort of twist and tweak this wooden deck with. So when we actually won it was a small invited competition for 5 offices. So when we won the project based on the idea, we actually didn't have a design, and we started sitting down with this sort of rational 240 by 240, almost Miesian grid, putting like a workshop and sort of a dressing room building and a sort of clubhouse building on the other side. That sort of in plan are really rigorous, but in section they become more interesting. So you have sort of this diving down to reach the water, climbing up to be the shelter of boats or to contain the clubhouse. And it's actually all this quite traditional timber structure made by normal carpenters. But you see, as soon as you put the wood cladding on, it becomes this sort of very smooth, almost dune-like landscape. And also it has a sort of a generosity and a sort of, it tends to invite, because instead of just being 400 square meters of buildings, it's 2,000 square meters of public landscape. We got the city to approve that they consider it a landscape, because normally if you do something that has a slope higher than 1 to 12, you need to fence it off. But here they actually accepted this sort of insane 45-degree slope, just because they see it as a landscape project. And it has this sort of instant electrification effect on kids that just by seeing these swoopy things, they start running around. Actually, it's so steep that you can actually slide on a pair of jeans. And also, so it's like basically the building is super simple, like glass, concrete. The material palette is really restricted because the main idea is this sort of big public gesture of the public landscape. And so because of the generosity, it has really become a place where the local people go at night to walk the dog or take a walk with a girlfriend. And it has really become part of the public life down there. The Maritime Youth House was the first building we ever realized. The second building that we're just realizing or finishing the 15th of December this year is a big housing project in Copenhagen. Copenhagen has, like when Copenhagen 10 years ago decided to do a new subway, they decided that the way to finance it would be to extend the subway for 5 kilometers into a big open preserved green that they would then sort of make non-preserved and turn into a new city area. So selling off the lots would sort of finance the subway. And they made a big competition, big international competition 10 years ago, where they actually selected 5 winners, and then they sort of combined the qualities of the 5 winners and worked on it for 10 years. And the idea, the ambition was to sort of define the city of the future. And what they came up with was this sort of a square perimeter block with a courtyard in the middle, which is sort of the generic tissue of 95% of Copenhagen. So when we got the commission, we decided to try to sort of squeeze as many qualities out of the local master plan without actually breaking the law. So first we decided to open up the block to give view and access to 2 canals to the east and the west. Then we pushed the south side back. There's a park here to create this sort of south-facing front lawn instead of only having a north-facing courtyard. And we did the same to the street side, creating these little urban plazas that would be extensions of the sidewalk, which would have the effect that all the apartments, instead of sort of looking straight at each other or straight into this courtyard, they all are facing out to the more sort of attractive neighbors. There's a big park to the west, and there's a big sort of single-family home carpet of houses to the east. So here you can see on one side, next to the sort of suburban neighborhood, we could only build 16 meters, but towards the city and the park, we could build almost 40 meters. So the building is sort of, the one building, the V-shaped building is sloping, and the other one is jumping. That's why it's called the VM house in plan. So VM means world champion in Danish, which we kind of like. But the south side is dominated by these balconies. There was going to be 110 balconies, so we knew that whatever we would do, it would be the balconies that would sort of define the architecture. And we thought it would be a pity to sort of make this composition of boxes. So we developed this balcony type that our client ended up naming the Leonardo DiCaprio balcony, because you have the sort of the experience of standing sort of in 30 meters of height, 5 meters out in the air, with some hot redhead. But actually, another interesting effect is actually that this is going to be the first building that gets realized in this part of town. So it's going to be the sort of completely sort of an pyramid, like it's going to be sort of this pioneer building out there, no neighborhood whatsoever. So we thought, like, if you're living on the 10th floor in an empty neighborhood, it might be sad. And like this, we actually created almost this sort of vertical backyard where all the people living here, it's actually sort of slightly inspired by Natasha and Brett's apartment in Holland, where you almost have this sort of backyard community. And especially here, because they stick out 5 meters, you really get to know the neighbor quite a lot. So this was the first balcony that got up. First bunch, and how it looks today. For the apartments, we like for the V house, we used this sort of balcony access on the north side. For the M house, we decided to use this sort of Le Corbusier Unité d'Habitation setup, where 3 apartments would sort of wrap around a central corridor. But where in Unité, it's this sort of 300-meter long, dead-end corridor. In the M house, because it's zigzagging all the time, it would be more like these sort of bullet holes penetrating all the way through the building, the views of the landscape on both sides, and then sort of wrapped around with apartments. And they're sort of treated in the same way all the way around, so it really sort of becomes this sort of excavation through the building. And actually 2 of our friends moved in there. And instead of just having this sort of staircase, people are accessing from these corridors. And sort of after a month, they had a big party where they would have this sort of 30-meter long table in the corridor. So it really sort of became this sort of a social space. the apartments are all based on this idea because everybody we know that just bought apartments, they spent the first 2 months knocking down walls, making bigger spaces. So we thought we would save people the trouble and only make one-room apartments. So all apartments are just one big space. But then they have this three-dimensional variety in the V house. It's like two types that sort of double width to the south and double height to the north. That sort of constitute this sort of generic building block. In the M house, it's this idea of taking Le Corbusier slightly further. So instead of having these super deep, narrow apartments, we put 3 units together so they borrow width and height from each other. So 2 duplexes and a triplex make this generic building block. But then because the V house and M house are sort of cut at odd angles, the roof is sloping, it's zigzagging, and so you have all these sort of this onslaught of eccentric apartments. So that actually based on the sort of the 5 sort of main typologies, you get this sort of wallpaper of 76 different apartment types. So this is what it looked like this summer, where the M house was almost complete. The apartments, you have this combination of double height spaces where you enter. There's a bridge going over this void leading to the rooms downstairs. You know, there's always, like most apartments are duplexes or triplexes. We did this sort of exhibition where we invited 5 different artists and designers to decorate some of the apartments. And sort of the real estate agent had told the client that you know, it's all, you know, duplexes and triplexes. You know, it's glass from floor to ceiling. You know, it's like living in a fish tank. People won't buy it. But actually, sort of on the first day they were for sale, they sold 100 apartments, and they were sold out in 3 weeks. So like the first day that they had opened, the first people who moved in, I took my car out there and looked in the evening. And you know, the real estate agent had been really worried that the Danes wouldn't be able to tolerate this amount of glass from floor to ceiling. And then I was sitting in my car, and I look in, and there's this guy sitting watching TV. Then I thought, okay, he's really sort of on display. Then his girlfriend comes in panties and a t-shirt. Okay, and then so they start kissing, and then so they start making out. And I've been parked there for 30 seconds, and there was already action. So so the real estate agent was right, you know, but somehow it works anyway. The material palette is extremely sober because it's so geometrically complicated. There's so many different apartments. So it's just glass, wooden frames, and these aluminum cladding. So in the end, we thought that maybe it had become slightly too dry. So for the 2 big entrances of the M house, there was going to be this sort of 50 square meter big blank wall, and we wanted to do something more special. But the client said, you know, we can't burn any money for fun. So then we had dinner. Actually, this is Matteo. He's here in the room today. He was the curator of the Venice Biennale in 2004, and his nose is right next to this painting, which is at the top floor of the Arne Jacobsen Hotel in Copenhagen. And I asked the waiter, what's this? And it's Alberto Co. It's the name of the restaurant, but it's also the name of the director. And that was the client when Arne Jacobsen was doing the building. And the painting is actually painted by Arne Jacobsen himself as a tribute to the client. I thought it was really fascinating, this idea of this almost Renaissance architect, Leonardo da Vinci, who is both sort of architect and painter and scientist. And so we told the client about this thing, but we're not this is the client. This is Per and Axel. We told them about this idea of the Renaissance architect that would build the client's house and then paint this painting as a homage. And because the surface was so big, we found out that we would just use these standard 10 by 10 bathroom tiles, and we would only use the 10 standard colors from the Evers color palette. We'd actually make sort of this decoration that would be sort of just a diffuse geometric pattern, but sort of seen from a distance. So when you, there's actually a kindergarten right next to it. So when the children enter in the morning, they have to sort of say hello to Uncle Per and Axel. One of the effects was that apart from being happy about selling the apartments, I think the client also got pretty happy about having their faces in 50 square meters, so almost totalitarian scale. Out of enthusiasm, they bought the neighbor site, where the local plan said that there had to be this parking house. The strategy is that instead of having parking on the street, there's going to be these parking houses here and there, where people living there can park. And he was going to do housing and the parking. So we proposed that all of Denmark is completely flat. Most of it is sort of semi-reclaimed land. So we said, okay, why don't we sort of, since we're going to do it at once anyway, why don't we consider the parking as the potential of having sort of a topography upon which we can build this thin layer of houses. And really sort of by twisting it, we would get this sort of south-facing tilted plane of one floor of housing, sort of sitting on this sort of bedrock of parking. Then we would sort of cut it up so that the people that bought an apartment in our M house would still have a nice view. The parking would be below and the houses would be on top. So it would almost be like this sort of suburban neighborhood flowing over the parking. So on one side it's like this sort of pixelated mountain of single-family homes, each with a 100 square meter garden looking to the south. The parking, instead of being this sort of flat stacked space, it becomes this sort of diagonal cathedral for motor culture, where people access their apartments in the roof. And the sort of the view from the mountain, you have this sort of extremely sort of suburban lifestyle with garden and house, but in an urban setting. And then you have this sort of amazing artificial landscape rising to 35 meters of height. And the sort of the city facade, because the slope of the mountain faces towards the neighboring suburban neighborhood, but the city facade actually becomes the parking, and it needs to be a naturally ventilated parking for the economy. So we need to put some kind of rain and wind screen that's still perforated. And then we asked the company that makes perforated plates, and they just bought a new machine that can make holes up to the size of 3 centimeters in diameter, based on bitmap input at the price of 100 euros per square meter. So since we've always been referring to it as the housing mountain, we contacted this Himalaya photographer who gave us this nice image of Mount Everest. That is going to be a 1,500 square meter big black and white reproduction of Mount Everest. Probably the largest black and white photo in the world. So seen from inside, it's just going to be this sort of abstract pattern, but from the outside, it's going to be this sort of portrait of the Himalayas. So basically, if it turns out to be a success, we're going to repeat it as much as we possibly can. The last project in this series, I think there's 4 more projects to go, it's sort of a sign that there's this sort of increasing desire for experimentation happening. So when we started 5 years ago, just doing a semi-unusual housing project was really radical, but now this sort of mix of houses on top of parking and with shops is quite normal. And recently we were contacted by 10 existing car dealers that wanted to move together into a new car house just on a neighbor site. So both all these existing car dealers want to move together in a new 16,000 square meter showroom. But also they're going to move together with this sort of mix of sort of showroom, shops, housing, and parking in this sort of node where the subway, the regional train, and the highway crosses each other on the way to the airport and on the way to Sweden. And sort of course, of references, you have these automated parking systems, especially the Fiat factory in Torino. We were quite fascinated by. Of course, the vocabulary of highway structures. So, but our first attempt was sort of, maybe you can make a new building by sort of combining some existing buildings that you like. At the time, we were really happy with the V house. We also really liked the Fiat factory, and maybe they could merge to become the OK house or something like that, or maybe the AIDS ribbon house. But somehow it was a bit too boring, because it would really be like a parking building with a showroom and a housing building to the south. So then we decided to contact or consult our friend Neufert and look into parking systems. And quite quickly we singled out this one that we really liked. It's a 60 diameter spiral ramp where the spiral becomes so big that you can actually park, the slope is so gentle that you can actually park all the way up. And then in the heart of it you have this sort of high-speed descent that's like a corkscrew spiral going down, and you can leave. So we thought, why don't we make like sort of an inverted perimeter block? So instead of having buildings on the periphery and an empty space in the middle, we would have like a solid of parking in the middle, and then all the different functions would stick out in different directions. Showrooms towards the street, housing towards the south, and you could actually have car access all the way to all the floors in all of the buildings. We thought it was pretty cool, but somehow it looked a little bit like sort of the V house in all directions, something like that. So we kept looking and came up with this one, which is the idea of considering that the housing, that the parking could be almost like a socle, that we would elevate these podiums of spirals so that we could create this sort of almost like the Guggenheim Museum in New York, a continuous showroom where you would take the elevator up to 35 meters, and then you would sort of meander down this like 1 kilometer long showroom all the way to the street level. You could easily drive cars in and out of the showroom. And then as the roof of the showroom, there would be this 1 kilometer long row house development of 2 floors. And suddenly it looked a lot more interesting. So basically you can imagine you have the parking, the showroom, and the housing. Each apartment is a duplex that has its own private house, and you have this sort of skylit access street that is actually so gently sloping that you have handicap accessibility all over, and you can imagine that a kid on a skateboard could probably pick up some pretty intense speed moving down. This is the basic diagram. So the housing being the roof of the showroom, and the parking being the foundation. The showroom would be this sort of meandering, continuous space that would twist and warp slightly, and it would be covered by these courtyards that would sort of follow the sort of homogeneous stepping of the houses to create these sort of skylights that would bring light and views into the showroom. So like if you move up through the plans, it's a bit like this sort of race car track with 3 different programs chasing each other up the hill. What happened was that we presented it to the car dealers and to a housing manufacturer and to the parking company, and they totally liked the project. So you can actually see the V house under construction in the other end of the image. So it's going to be this sort of plot strip of the housing mountain, the VM house, and this car city emerging. As a last housing project in Copenhagen, we had just had municipal elections yesterday, and the mayor that got elected, River is this the first female mayor of Copenhagen, and her political program was to create 5,000 new houses in the center of Copenhagen, but there's no real space for it. So to be prepared for for her getting elected, we decided to come up with where could we actually locate these 5,000 houses. And we found this piece of green that's actually within the city limits. It's the former, it's this sort of big open sports field. It's where all of the socialists and the unions have their sports fields. It's the former airfield of Copenhagen, and now it's this sort of big open sports field. So it's so much part of the social democrat culture that to propose to build on it would be completely suicide. But it's actually so huge that if we could just get the permission to buy a 20-meter wide belt all around the perimeter, we would get a perimeter block that would be 3 kilometers long. We would then sort of manipulate it to avoid existing buildings. Then we would sort of differentiate the heights. It's surrounded by industry and allotments on all sides. So we would just adjust the heights to respect the neighbors. We would create these sort of huge gates that would allow the public still to access the park. And in order to sort of assure the visual contact to the surrounding, the towers of Copenhagen, we would sort of open these moments. So this would be sort of the plan of it. So this is Hornbækhus, designed by modern architects Kai Fisker. It's the biggest perimeter block in Denmark, famous for its big park, green park in the courtyard. This would be 10 times bigger. And it would really be sort of, for the first time, the most attractive view would not be to the street side, but actually to the courtyard side, because you would have this massive central park. And from the park you would still be able to see, it's actually the green trees is Christiania, the sort of this free city where you can still buy hash legally, or sort of semi-legally. And you have the historical towers sticking up. These vast gates opening up to the park. And actually, like for now, we're working with this idea that we could actually create this sort of Copenhagen version of the Great Wall of China, that you would have this sort of 3 kilometer long animated landscape moving around. Sort of a bit like this. And sort of it was just published in the newspaper, so 2 days before the elections. And based on that article, we got a contact from a group of investors. So they already paid us for the work. And so if it works out, it will be sort of our first sort of completely self-made commission. The 2 last projects that I brought. It's actually the first project we ever did, and the last project we did recently, but they're somehow related. The first project was a project that we did like after 6 months of existing. It's a waterculture house in the north of Denmark, and our idea was to sort of turn the traditional swimming pool inside out. So instead of making a building and putting pools inside it, we would organize all the water areas optimally, and then we would sort of subordinate the land to the organization of the water. So the pool program consisted of a diving pool, a relaxing pool, a playing pool, and a swimming pool. And our main idea was to sort of stretch out the swimming pool to create this sort of 150-meter long canal that would join all the other pools as lagunas. So instead of being in the water, going on land, jumping in the water again, we would actually swim from one activity to the other. And just like in a stadium, we would sort of connect the ends to create this lake with an island in the middle. And we put the lake in the landscape next to the existing sport facilities. You know, the lake would have all these different programs. The island would have different peninsulas with the lifeguards and this sort of panopticon position in the center. The design would be like this, sort of this nice island with these pools with different depths all the way around. And then in order to sort of ensure the idea that you were actually swimming like instead of swimming back and forth inside a swimming pool, you would actually be swimming all along the view of the landscape, like this sort of 360-degree panorama. So we lifted the facade 3 meters, so completely without columns. So you'd have this sort of amazing view of the surroundings. And normally in swimming pool designs, you have this sort of outside the swimming pools, you have this sort of layer of fat of the dressing rooms and table rooms and arrival and stuff like that. We put all that in these beams spanning the circle in the attic. Those sort of programmatic beams are sitting on stilts that rest on the island, and then they go out and carry the facade. So here it would be the thermal baths, the dressing room for men, dressing room for women, the roof of the dressing room for men becoming a terrace, and finally the restaurant becoming this sort of bridge that would have views of the surroundings and also of the diving pool. So you would sort of enter, dress in the beams above, go down on the island and jump into the lake. So at night it would be this sort of hovering UFO, people swimming sort of along the landscape. So for the diving pool, we put a climbing wall that was just like these huge sheets of glass where we glued on these climbing things, so you would fall into the water. The thermal baths would be this sort of Sumto-esque collage of different rooms with different temperatures. You know, thermal bath would be the staircase going up to hotter and hotter steam. The massage room would have a hole in the floor so you could look at people swimming by underneath. Some rooms would have water sort of all the way around. We found this extremely nice website called the Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Edition. That turned out to be very helpful for the competition. And the sauna would be this sort of a little piece of Finland with, you know, looking out into a birch forest, and right next to it a room with no roof, so you can roll in the snow in the winter, have a rain shower. So this is basically what the project looked like. We won the competition, and based on that competition, we could hire real architects that could sort of run the project. We got a real office space, and we bought licenses to all our softwares, and so we became a real practice. And we worked on it for a year and a half until there was municipal elections 4 years ago. And the new municipal government decided to cut the project out of the budget. So in response, we cut the city out of the project, and sort of went on this tour to see if we could find a new host town. So quite quickly we had a meeting with the mayor of Randers, who was very fascinated by the project. And we started doing it with Randers instead. But then they discovered that they had fungus in 2 of their schools, and the bill was 100 million kroner, exactly the price of a water culture house. So in the meanwhile, we contacted one of our friends who's a computer game designer, and thought, you know, if we can't actually swim in there, at least we could, you know, kill each other in a nice environment. It turned out that when he was designing the project for us, he told us about the concept of gameplay, which is actually quite cool. You know, sort of not knowing which kind of ism we would belong to. Like gameplay is the way you assess the quality of the game design. That it's not, you know, the most beautiful graphics. It's not, you know, the biggest game, because it might get too heavy, or like if it's there's too much variation, you might get lost. Or if it's like too well tailored a plot, it might not leave you enough freedom. So there's a lot of parameters where you have to find the optimum balance between sort of the specific and the general, and also between sort of effort and effect. We thought it was a quite cool way of assessing architecture, and we've really tested this building through, and it has, you know, extremely good gameplay. So over the last 4 years, we've been traveling around Denmark with the project under the arm, trying to find a new sponsor. And finally, December last year, there was There was a touchdown in Odense, the hometown of Hans Christian Andersen. There was actually elections yesterday again, and the mayor changed. So now we are really afraid that the same thing is going to happen. But we have actually, it has been decided once, so I think it's gonna happen this time. This is going to be the sign when you enter. The last project that's like sort of a bit the child of this first project is a project we got from a client who had seen our water culture house, and he had also seen a program on BBC where they were asking people which was the thing they had done in their life that was the one thing they would recommend others to do before they died. And like number one on the list by far was to swim with dolphins. So the client thought, okay, there's got to be money in this. So he bought 7 dolphins. He bought 7 dolphins that are now swimming on an island in Thailand. And then he wanted us to do this sort of delphinarium that's supposed to be a hybrid of like a spa, swimming pool. You know, you can swim with dolphins, you can see dolphins. There's a hotel, there's a holiday apartments, there's even a cosmetic surgery clinic, a conference center, sort of sanatorium. And it's all got to be this sort of artificial islands, completely surrounded by water on all sides. So we start out with this sort of circular design. So all of the pools would sort of orient outwards and have views of the water. And then we would sort of lift up this flat island to become these hills. The hills would be sort of covering these caves where people could swim, the different pools, the different activities would sort of be located looking out over the surrounding water. On top of these caves there would be these sort of Vietnamese rice fields. There would be the hotels and the conference spaces. And they would constitute this sort of artificial island, completely surrounded by water with a beach here, an outdoor pool there, and all the water would be on the level of the surrounding water. So if you move up, it's basically sort of pools in all directions, covered by rooms in all directions. And the view from the rooms is actually going to be sort of half the surrounding water and half the, its own landscape. And then the client's idea was that we would build this on a shipyard, the way you do oil rigs, and then we would sail it or like tow it to a convenient location and tie it down there. So the convenient location could be this sort of nice sort of a palm tree island somewhere in the Pacific, or it could be sort of in the middle of a fjord somewhere in Norway, or maybe even better, floating somewhere in a sea of ice, so you can choose to swim with dolphins or penguins. In the beginning of next year, we're going to go on this tour to visit 10 different possible investors and sites, and decide sort of where it's going to land. So maybe it's going to end up somewhere near you. That was the last project. Does anybody have any questions?
Bjarke did my job for me. Are there any questions? Okay, while you're ruminating profound thoughts in your head, which I know you're all, you can't help but do, I'm going to ask Bjarke a question. You used the word literal, I think, quite early on, and there's a kind of guilt-free attitude towards being literal, which I think is quite intriguing. If we go back, I don't know, only 20 years, let's say, even in this same building and even the same room, that guilt-free attitude towards being literal just wouldn't have existed. It didn't exist. It was quite the opposite. You'd have Leber's Woods, kind of incredible sort of weird opaque drawings of Zaha, and people saying, "You can't build this shit. Is it really even architecture?" So on and so forth. There's a great tradition of architects and architecture particularly in the latter part of the 20th century, divorcing themselves from, let's say, the kind of field of communication that opens itself out beyond the world of architecture, and it really focused into communicating within itself. The work that you do is anything but that. I mean, every image that you produce seems to me ready. It's like a ready cooked meal for either the client or the public or the newspapers and so on and so forth. How do you chart that? I mean, this kind of, I think it's wonderful, the fact that there's guilt-free, there's no melancholic posing and so on and so forth. I mean, is that strategic, or is that just who you are?
I think there's a certain sort of taste for insisting on the obvious, but in a way sometimes the most obvious idea, you can't get yourself to do it because it's it's too obvious, and somehow then you always, or like quite often in architecture, you end up on this sort of more mysterious or sort of mythical discourse into something crooked, whereas we really try to say, okay, this would really be great. It might not seem like the most sort of unexpected response, but if you work with it, you can actually sort of make it become the vehicle for architecture and space and all this stuff anyway. And I think almost you can sort of see in the sort of tour through the project that there is this almost increasing sort of like the almost perverse taste in trying to find a new thing that would be even more obvious to do. So a bit, this we were extremely excited when we found out, like when we did the Violet project. At first we were sort of, that's too lame, but we even sent it to the city architect, and he sort of, that's a good one. So okay, show me the real plan. So and we said, no, like you have to try and understand. And then sort of when we realized that the sort of the Umeo project turned out to be the name of people in Chinese, we were almost like doing the same again. But then it was also like this perverse idea of retrofitting one project from one location to another location. So I think, like, so if we like it, we really sort of go quite far to try to prove that you can. Basically, it's a bit like finding freedoms. You can do whatever you want. Like basically, you're the architect, you're in charge. So it's only you or your fixed ideas that's stopping you from doing whatever you want. And if you really want to do it, then you want to do it. It's not like we're saying nothing matters. Like it all matters, but you're the one who decides. So you're in charge. So empowering the architect.
It's interesting because I think you empower yourselves, by just being incredibly communicative and kind of straightforward, and that obviousness, rather than presenting the architect as a slightly foreboding figure that exists in a slightly metaphysical space above the rest of humanity. That you're basically on the same playing field, and so there isn't this aura, this slightly intimidating aura of distantification and so on and so forth, that I think many architects revel in and try to use, and for a long time, I mean, one only has to think of the particular ways in which Mies photographed himself with a cigar and so on and so forth. That this was hard currency for architects for a long time, but I don't know if it really cuts it anymore.
So there's one thing sort of. I've experienced quite a few times that some like older, sort of more avant-garde architects have been obsessed with the idea that there's that it's not the true story that we're showing. That there's like sort of that there has to be and the story you're not telling, because it's not supposed to be that simple, or you're not supposed to say how you did it. So this sort of obsession with but that's not why it's like that. It's like that because you something else. But they can't believe that it's But of course, there's all the abortions that you don't show. Like for instance, there's one project where there was these like 90 different models flickering. But they are also made in attempting this or that. But so you only show part of the image, but the actual story you tell is not a construct. It is actually the simplified version of the evolution of the project.
Any questions? Yeah.
Do we have sorry.
I was going to say it's quite inspirational work, and you seem to have a lot of fun with it. which is I think wonderful. What kind of type of projects do you want to go for next? I mean, it seems that you've such good enjoyment with it. What would be your dream project next?
Actually, we just got a commission that's it's a bit like a dream project and a dream client. So when I graduated from the School of Architecture 6 years ago, there was this great visionary developer who got into some kind of scandal with some bonds where the signatures were fake or whatever. So he ended up going to prison. But it was really sort of a sad moment because he was like the only visionary developer in the entire country. And my professor at the time was asked by the newspaper to write about him, and they were expecting him to sort of come with some kind of slander. But he actually ended up sort of proposing that the state's art fund should go and guarantee for the fake signatures. So because he couldn't imagine the Danish building industry without this guy. And the guy is still in prison, but he's coming out. And it's like the scale of the project is sort of insane. It's like 100,000 square meters, and it's a combination of houses, shops, like bazaars, sports facilities, and a mosque in Denmark. So it's a completely insane mix, and I think there's this tendency in our projects that it has become sort of a higher degree of programmatic alchemy, that you make quite profane buildings. None of them are museums or sort of concert halls or anything, but they're just like ordinary ingredients that if you put them together in a new mix, you can actually get gold out of it. And I think this last project is turning into something that's quite interesting. And then of course, I mean, I would love to do the gin housing or the gin hotel in Shanghai. That would be enough.
Then you can retire.
Exactly.
Maybe one more question. Appetites have been satiated. Bjarke, thank you very, very much. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah?